Welcome. This is one of a series that we do at the Climate Talks called Climate Matters. It's a TV talk show disguised as a press conference or vice versa. I'm your host, Stuart Scott, and we're coming to you live from COP23 in Bonn, Germany. Here's my email address. I always give it at the beginning and end so people can write. Today's guests with me, first Dr. James Hansen, very familiar to all of us. He's former director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies and director of Climate Science Awareness and Solutions Programs at Columbia University's Earth Institute. Also with us is Sophie Kivlehan, who's an undergraduate at Dickinson College and one of the 21 youth plaintiffs in the federal lawsuit in the United States, Juliana v. U.S. government. Dr. Hansen is both the plaintiff and the expert science advisor in that case. Sophie is also his granddaughter, so she's been raised with climate awareness. Today's show we're calling Young People's Burden, Averting Climate Disaster. Now, some of you may recognize this. This was from the 1992 Rio conference that basically started our path towards doing something about this seriously. I'm going to give the mic now to Sophie. Take over.
Hello, my name is Sophie Kivlehan. I'm from Pennsylvania, United States. I would first show a few minutes of a speech given by 12-year-old Severin Suzuki 25 years ago at the first Rio Earth Summit, a plea to adults to take actions to avoid dangerous climate change. Then my grandfather and I will take an objective look at the response of the world to her plea, and I will make my own plea to today's adults, but I will argue that young people must do more than plea. We must demand our rights.
Hello, I'm Severin Suzuki, speaking for ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference. We've raised all the money to come here ourselves, to come 5,000 miles to tell you adults you must change your ways. Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. I am afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in it. All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. I'm only a child, and I don't have all the solutions. But I want you to realize, neither do you. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct, and you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. In my anger, I am not blind, and in my fear, I am not afraid of telling the world how I feel. Do not forget why you are attending these conferences, who you're doing this for. We are your own children. You are deciding what kind of a world we are growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world, and we're doing the best we can. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. You grown-ups say you love us, but I challenge you, please, make your actions reflect your words. Thank you.
25 years later, and that speech could be given today and still have the same meaning.
Yes, make your actions reflect your words. Have actions reflected the words? The promise to avoid a dangerous climate change? Let's look at the data. All nations agreed to the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. In the 25 years leading up to the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, emissions increased 1.5% per year. But after the 1997, emissions continued to increase, even faster than before. The graph on the right has a linear scale, so you can see easily the rapid emissions growth.
Emissions from mature economies stabilized, but they had already stabilized by 1980. There's no indication that the 1997 Kyoto Protocol had any significant effect. Emissions from developing countries, developing world, continue to increase as those countries try to raise their standards of living, as they have every right to do. China's emissions may be stabilizing now because they are becoming a mature economy and are trying to limit air pollution from coal.
Because of these increasing greenhouse gases, global temperature is rising. Today, global temperature is more than 1 degree Celsius warmer than its pre-industrial level. How high can we let temperature rise? Our best guide is the Earth's history. In the Holocene, the past 11,000 years, the period in which civilization developed, maximum temperature was only 1/2 of a degree Celsius warmer than pre-industrial. Now temperature is far above the pre-industrial Holocene. It is now close to that of the Eemian period 120,000 years ago, when sea level reached 6 to 9 meters or 20 to 30 feet higher than today.
Why has temperature increased almost linearly since 1975? Because Earth is out of energy balance, more energy coming in than going out. And Earth stays out of balance because since 1975, we have kept adding gases that increase climate forcing about 0.04 watts per meter squared every year, which will be 4 watts in 100 years, which is equivalent to doubled carbon dioxide and 3 degrees Celsius global warming, which would be enough to guarantee disastrous climate change and loss of all coastal cities. So IPCC defined a new scenario, RCP 2.6, which we have shown is approximately equivalent to reducing emissions 3% per year. Such reduced emissions limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we also extract at minimum 100 gigatons of carbon from the air via improved agricultural and forestry practices.
I'd like to just say that 0.4 watts per meter squared doesn't sound like much, but Dr. Hansen has equated that in the past to approximately 400,000 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs, the heat from that being set off every day, 365 days per year. It's a lot.
That number of bombs is the energy imbalance of the planet, 0.6 watts per meter squared. So in any case, let's continue. Okay. Sophie.
Now let's look carefully at what's happening in the real world. We see that the real world, the top red line, is diverging away from RCP 2.6. How important is this gap? Couldn't we just extract some CO2 from the air to close the gap? Sure. The gap of 0.013 watts per meter squared is exactly the reduction of climate forcing that occurs if we reduce atmospheric CO2 by 1 part per million. 1 ppm CO2 is 2 billion tons of carbon. However, to reduce atmospheric CO2 by 2 gigatons, we must extract 4 gigatons of carbon from the air because of the equilibrium that exists between atmospheric CO2, ocean CO2, and soil and biosphere CO2. The cost at an optimistic rate of $150 per ton of carbon is $600 billion. But $1.4 trillion at $350 per ton. This cost, about $1 trillion, is for just 1 year. And the gap is growing each year. Adults claim that they're doing something about climate, but look at what a mess they leave for young people. They are not slowing down the climate freight train by 1 iota, not by 1 bit. 25 years after the first Rio Earth Summit, the words 12-year-old Severin Suzuki spoke should still ring in the ears of government officials. But do our governments really hear about her concerns? Or do they care more about deals with the fossil fuel industry? Fears expressed by this young girl are coming true. Species are disappearing. Coral reefs are bleaching. Their life is disappearing. Droughts become stronger and fires are raging, driving refugees and increasing conflict among people. Storms become stronger and floods more devastating. Ice sheets are melting. We debate whether we will lose coastal cities in 150 years, 100 years, or 50 years. And adults wonder why young people have increased anxiety today. Severin spoke directly to the delegates at Rio. A few of them sat up and took notice. But how long did it affect their conscience? More important, did it affect their government's actions? No. If I spoke before the delegates today, I would feel the same fear and anger that she expressed, and more, because I see the hypocrisy of our governments, of our leaders. In truth, for all their posturing, they have accomplished painfully little to avert the onset of catastrophic climate change. Money has been shown to be more important than their children's future. I am afraid and I am angry at the problems that greedy and foolish adults have created. But just as Severin said, in my anger, I am not blind. And in my fear, I am not afraid to tell them all, diplomats, negotiators, leaders of government, banks, and businesses, how I feel. Adults, you say you love us, but I challenge you to make your actions reflect your words, without hesitation, without consideration of profit, instead caring about what is most important, the lives of your children. If you continue to pursue selfish aims, the results will be enormous suffering by your children, and no amount of money will save even the wealthiest of children. Because money is, at its root, a fiction, and it will disappear rapidly in the world that you are leading us toward. I hope that you are listening, and I thank you for letting these words into your heart. However, I must also say that we young people must not rely on only the hopes that you might be listening. Young people are people, and we have rights, and we must fight for them. Along with 20 other young people and my grandfather, I am a plaintiff in a lawsuit filed by Our Children's Trust against President Trump and the United States government for violating our constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property. We still live in a nation of laws, and I believe that our courts will find in our favor and require a government to develop and carry out a plan to reduce fossil fuel emissions. But will it be too late? And there is such a thing as being too late. I encourage more young people to stand up for their rights. Just a few days ago, this group in Minnesota was granted intervenor status as they fought to stop a new tar sands pipeline. These young people are standing up to fight on their own, without money and without a lawyer. Meanwhile, what are adults doing? Making money. Developing the dirtiest carbon on Earth, tar sands, tar shale, and hydrofracking, leaving a mess for young people to clean up. And they even leave us the tab, $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. Where can we find it? We must fight for our rights now, before it is too late. Thank you for listening and supporting us.
We can open it up to questions now, if there are any questions.
Thank you. Marlo Hood with Agence France Presse. Sophie, a question for you. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your lawsuit, what the basis of it and what the status of it is right now.
Sure. This lawsuit was filed in 2015 against the federal government by an organization called Our Children's Trust, which is based in Oregon. And we have what makes our case different from other environmental lawsuits is our very strong constitutional basis. We talk about the concept of public trust and the public trust doctrine, but we really have a strong tie to our Constitution, saying that we are fighting for our right to life, liberty, and property, Fifth Amendment rights. And so it's very unprecedented, as the judges in Eugene have said so far, and it's looking really great. The process is very slow, but it's the best we can do.
Yeah, we should say the Trump government has tried to slow this suit down by asking the Court of Appeals to intervene. And it is now being delayed because of that. But I think that will not last much more than a few weeks longer. But instead of the trial being in February, it may be delayed a few months because of that.
Any other questions?
Alex Whiting from the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Could you tell me what you hope to achieve through the lawsuit?
The main goal is to put pressure on the government, to have them realize that young people notice that they're not doing their jobs, and we're not going to be quiet about it. No civil rights suit, no civil rights issue in history has ever been solved without the pressure of the public behind it. So that's the main goal, is to show the government that that pressure is there, and then once the lawsuit is successful, the goal would be to have the government have to enforce an effective plan to reduce emissions at a safe level, and then the courts would have to, unlike the Kyoto Protocol or RCP 2.2 or 2.6, the courts would have to check back in with them and make sure that they're committing.
Yeah, the suit asks for the government to have a plan to reduce emissions at a rate that the science has specified, which would, if followed globally, and if you extract CO2 via improved agricultural and forestry practices, to the tune of, at the time we began the first lawsuit, it required 100 gigatons extraction from the air. Well, now, if you want to get back to 350 parts per million by the end of this century, you would actually have to extract 150 instead of 100 gigatons. So it's an ambitious target to get back to what is estimated to be a safe level of atmospheric carbon dioxide. It's an ambitious target, but that's what the science tells us, and that's what's been ignored by the governments around the world. They just pretend that, well, if we're doing some things, moving in the right direction, that maybe we'll solve the problem. But as we showed on our first slides, the emissions just keep going up. And if you're going to solve the problem, you actually have to get the emissions to go down. The courts cannot define a solution, but they can require the other branches of the government to report back that they're doing their job. And my expectation is that the only way you will actually solve that is by putting a price on carbon, because otherwise limited actions simply don't amount to that much.
There's also a value in this trial in that other countries, young people in other countries, may follow suit. It's hoped that they will follow suit, and we're actually here to try to help lead that way, to help break that ice a little bit. And there's, I believe, a precedent in the Netherlands of the government having been found doing an insufficient amount about climate change. So, of course, if we're successful in the United States, it will be a very powerful message internationally.
Hello, Judy Saul for Cape Town TV and Mother Channel Internet Television. We had a report last year that the increasing heat has led to such a large wad of warm water on the surface that the phytoplankton are dying, and that at the present level of depletion of oxygen, because they're not functioning properly, the sea would be unable to support life at the year 2030, which brings the whole thing really much faster forward. So that's a 30-year peer-reviewed study. And I just wondered if there isn't anything that you could use from such a study to put even more pressure even on judges who otherwise are going to take a long time, wasting time when you haven't got time. We've got to be taking action right now.
Judy, since that's an offer of more data, if you'd send that to me, I'll share it with Dr. Hansen and Sophie.
Yeah, there are, of course, many climate impacts that are already occurring and can be attributed to climate change. So the evidence is there, and our executive and legislative branches of the government have just failed to substantially respond to that, and that's why we're trying to bring the courts into it as the one branch of government that is less sensitive to fossil fuel money, because it's very clear that fossil fuel money is having a huge impact on our governments, not just in the United States, but clearly in the United States, and as well as many other countries. So I think we have to bring the judiciary into this, as he said, not only in the United States, but in other countries.
We have time for one more short question. This gentleman had his hand up before.
Andres Freitas from the Dominican Republic, and thank you so much for your time. It seems to me that the price on carbon seems to be the most pragmatic solution to bring the real price on carbon so that it will have a real effect. But should we be talking about taxing carbon when shouldn't we be talking first about subsidies that fossil fuel companies received? I believe IMF recorded about 5.3 trillion in 2015.
Yeah, there are so many subsidies of fossil fuels that it's very hard. We certainly should try to eliminate those, but you have to do it at many different places where all these subsidies occur. And it's so much simpler to just have an across-the-board carbon fee, which then will just override those subsidies. If you allow that fee rate or tax rate to rise, it will just overwhelm the subsidies, and so that may be a more practical reason. But you certainly should try to eliminate those subsidies.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm your host, Stuart Scott. That's my email address. If you'd like to correspond or have any questions for Dr. Hansen, coming to you from COP23 in Bonn.